Welcome to Women Igniting Change, the place to be for women leaders and decision makers who are passionate about changing the world and determined to act. I'm your host, Robbin Jorgensen, former corporate executive, global speaker, and founder and CEO of Women Igniting Change. Let's dive in. Hello, Changemakers. Welcome back to the Women Igniting Change podcast. Today in the studio, I have Alice Sheehan. She is the COO and CFO of AllSides, an amazing organization here in the US that is focused on strengthening our democracy with balanced news, media bias ratings, and real conversations. Alice, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I am so excited to dive into this conversation because boy, do we need AllSides. Because that misinformation, it's everywhere. And not just here in the US, but globally, and you don't know what to trust or where to go. So I'm really excited to dive into this topic. But before we get to AllSides, let's dive into you a little bit. So you made a major pivot from an industry that has nothing to do with media or biases or anything. So aviation, supply chain, manufacturing, and public education to now being COO, CFO of AllSides. So walk our listeners through that transition and what led you to make that pivot.
Yeah, I mean, this was really my second pivot. So the first one you mentioned, I started in aviation supply chain. I worked for GE, fantastic experience. I learned a ton. But eventually, after about 6 years, I started to really feel a lack of purpose. And I also felt like the workload wasn't sustainable for me and kind of what I wanted with a family. And I have 2 kids now, but knew, at a certain point I wanted to have kids. And started to look around, and back in college, I had taken a vocations class. And they'd introduced me to this idea of asking yourself 3 questions. What are you good at? What makes you happy? And what does the world need? And if you can find something that's in the intersection of those 3 questions, that's the sweet spot. And so I looked around for that and ended up in schools. And that was fantastic. So I did that for 7 years. And then post-pandemic was looking around again. And I had been using AllSides for 3 years at that point as my news source. So I had found it in 2020. You described this well at the beginning, but I felt like I wasn't getting the full story from my typical news sources. And I was trying to, on my own, go and look at, left-leaning sources and right-leaning sources and see what they were saying on different things that were going on then. A lot was going on in 2020. And found AllSides and just felt like it really saved me a lot of time. So I was able to scroll the headline roundups that they do, or that we do, and quickly see what everyone was saying on a topic. And so when I was looking for something new to pursue, I started looking at just companies that I love and that I use. And that's really how I ended up at AllSides. They posted a part-time business manager role. I've been in operations and finance my whole career. And I thought, hey, I can do that. And then it slowly evolved from there.
Here's what I love about what you just said, because I think especially as women, we have this perception that, we graduate from college or university, we go into our chosen field, and you're there for 10, 15 years, and you're like, well, I can't really switch now. Like you have so much invested in X, whatever X is, that you get this perception that you can't make a pivot and go do something completely different that's calling you toward it. And I love that you're a beautiful example of doing that. This is the 3rd iteration of what you've done. So for our listeners out there, it's not baked. You do get to switch and change if you want to and move towards something that you're passionate about. So I love that you embody that beautifully. That's amazing.
And I do want to be honest or transparent that it's scary.
1000%. Absolutely.
Yeah. I was having breakfast with the other 3 people in Denver that had the same job as me in the public charter world, and was talking about my transition. And one of them asked, like, how don't you have to take a pay cut? How do you even find a job in a different sector? And I could just tell it is scary. And
Mhm.
I was lucky and privileged that my husband has a job. And so I was able to spend some time kind of searching for a little bit and didn't need something full time immediately.
Right.
So yes, it's possible and it is scary.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, when I left corporate after 20 plus years, I dove off the cliff and I prayed the net was there on the way down. So there's no question. It's super, super scary.
I took a
Right.
role that, you could say was beneath me. It was very easy. I knew I could do it.
Right.
And at that time when I took the job with AllSides, there was no promise that I would be, a leader within the company. It just
Mhm.
happened over time. So I think you have to also have trust in yourself that things you've done before you can do again.
Yeah. And I think we tend to, they're kind of like those little whispers that you hear them and you're like, no, 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 no. And you just push them
Mhm.
aside and you keep doing what you're doing. You don't listen to them. And if you don't listen to them, they get really, really loud until you really pay attention to them. So I
Yes.
love that you heard it. You're like, okay, seriously? All right, let's go. We're going to go this direction. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So talk us through, you said you've been using All Sides as your news source even before you became part of the team. Walk us through what it is. And when you go on and you look at, a article, give us a sense of what you find when you go to the site and how it's different and unique than Fox, CNN, ABC, NBC, any of those.
Yeah. So our goal at All Sides is to reveal bias, not tell you what to think.
Okay.
So there's a couple different models out there right now that most people get their information from. One is just anarchy, just chaos. Everyone says what they want to say, and you have to kind of, as a human, you have to kind of parse it and decide what to believe.
Mhm.
Another is the ministry of truth. I kind of
Oh,
think of Tom Brokaw a little bit back in the day, where he would say it, he'd say it very authoritatively, and that was the news. And we don't really want to go back to that because the beauty of the internet is that it has opened up all of these perspectives that didn't get raised up in the past. But right now, we're definitely, the internet is pretty chaotic. So, what we're trying to offer up with All Sides is balanced perspectives. So, if you land on our website, what you'll see is just our headline roundup or our balanced news feed, which is a feed of headline roundups. So, we have a news team working behind the scenes 24/7. They're always monitoring for what are the most important news headlines of the day. And then they will take a headline, they'll analyze what people are saying on the left, what people are saying in the center, and what people are saying on the right. They'll synthesize that into a really short summary that includes the facts of just a couple sentences. Here's what happened. And then what people are saying about it. The left is emphasizing this, or their left isn't talking about it, or the right is emphasizing this or not talking about it. And then they'll plug in three different sources, left, center, right, that you can then dive deeper into, and you can see those articles directly. So that's kind of the main resource that people use. And the headline roundups are actually, they're on an app. You can get them in a daily newsletter, or they're on our website. So whatever people, and we do Instagram posts too. So however people like to get their news, you can get it that way from All Sides. Um, and they're really, the other thing I want to mention is that they're based on our bias ratings. So All Sides has a patented bias rating process that balances input from experts and the public, left, center, right, to create what these ratings are. And so all of the headline roundups and how we decide what article is left, center, right, and what organization is left, center, right is all based on that bias rating process that's also going on.
got it. And do you see that when I'm looking at an article on All Sides? Does it show me what that bias rating is?
For the organization,
Got
yes.
it. Okay.
Now, for an individual article, very soon we are going to have the capability for you or anyone to assign a rating to an article. and then
Oh,
also
wow.
see what the more detailed analysis was for that article that leads to that rating.
Okay. Nice. So how do you define diversity beyond political thought as an
That's a
organization?
great question. Yeah, I mean, it's all about how we define ourselves as humans, and which is
Mm,
there's a multitude of ways, right?
yeah.
I mean, it's race, it's gender, it's age, socioeconomic status, where I grew
Mm,
up, what the composition of my family was. All of that goes into perspective, and some of our perspective gets defined as politics, but some of it, a lot of it, doesn't have anything to do with politics.
right.
Um, we've chosen to really focus on news and politics because that seems like the thorniest issue right now in our
Mhm.
democratic society. Um, but there, we're plans to go beyond that, and
Right.
really enable people to analyze perspectives on all sorts of things someday.
Yeah. So that kind of leads into my next question. Is there a way that feedback factors into shaping your approach to presenting those perspectives?
Absolutely. I mean, that we're all about feedback.
Okay. Tell me more.
So that was one of the most refreshing things about All Sides when I first got here is people engage. People are really curious. If you say something, we have an internal Slack messaging system. And if you say something, just expect that someone's going to come back with an alternate view. There's a through line of general respect of each other. I'd also say people generally like each other, but there is rigorous debate all day. And that's what we really promote as well. And so, anytime we post a blog, for example, we do have some unique content that we put out in addition to aggregating information. We have our unique content, and all of it gets reviewed by left, center, and right leaning individuals before it gets posted. And the reason for that is to make sure that the other side's not mischaracterized. That, if I say, well, this is what the left leaning people think, but I'm center, did I get that right? And I can ask someone with that perspective. Um, the other way that we get feedback is people can actually vote on our media bias ratings on our site. So if you go to NPR and it's left, rated left, you could vote whether or not you agree or disagree with that. Now that doesn't change the rating immediately, but if enough people disagree, we will look at it again.
Got it. Okay. So that's what you would do with that information. If enough people disagree, you may change where you put it. Got it.
Uh, Correct. We won't necessarily change it to what people voted, but it will
Okay.
trigger a review because,
Okay.
this is a dynamic situation. News is changing all the time. Newsrooms are changing all the time. And
Yep.
so we're constantly refreshing our ratings.
Is there a way that all sides has to adapt to changes in our political landscape or public discourse? Or is it pretty much static
Absolutely.
for what you've created? That's what you're putting out. Or do you have to be that agile and nimble based on what's happening at any given time?
Um, two responses to that. One is, there's a lot of people who want us to rate credibility. Credibility is changes constantly with any outlet. So they might get one story really right and they might get one story really, really wrong and have to, print a retraction, or maybe they never do.
Yeah.
And that happens across the board.
Yeah.
And whereas we find that bias is more consistent. So we have consistently been focused on bias.
Hmm.
Where we get a lot of feedback is people want us to focus on credibility. So we've started to do some work on misinformation, and we have fact checks, but rating a whole outlet on credibility and misinformation, that's harder to say, oh, here's how credible they are, and that can last, for
Hmm.
months or even years.
Right.
um the other thing that we're responding to is that a lot of people don't read their news anymore. So audio, video, those formats are really common ways for people to get
Right.
news in addition to social media. And so we're really delivering news through our app, through our newsletters, and through the website in more traditional formats. So those are ways that we're evolving in the future.
So one of the trainings that we do in some of our programs is all around unconscious bias. And, you can't see the picture when you're in the frame. We're all in our own
Mhm.
frames. So, and we all have those biases, conscious or unconscious. So how do you help your readers understand the biases that exists in what they're looking at?
That is critical. And I love that you do that training. We also have a rate your own bias survey, and when we onboard anyone into AllSides, they take 3 different surveys to kind of triangulate what their bias is, and then it's actually on our website. So we try to be radically transparent about who we are and who is behind AllSides and what their bias is, so you can decide for yourself if we have an agenda. We get accused of being, having a left leaning agenda. And then the next day we get accused of having a right leaning agenda. And that's how we know we're doing this right. um, so, um, first it's, analyze yourself, right? Know your own bias. But then to see bias in writing, for example, we've got tools on our website where, how to spot the 16 types of bias. We've also developed lesson plans for schools. So about a third of our traffic is actually from schools. Teachers found us before we even knew they found us. um, when I first started, my boss, John, who's the CEO, said, "Hey, I know schools are using us and librarians are using us. We don't really know how they're using us, and we're not doing anything for them." And so that was really my first task, was to listen to teachers about how they're using AllSides in the classroom. And they're teaching kids how to spot, we call it the 16 different types of bias, how to spot these types of bias in writing, and really having that digital literacy for how to be really um, analytical and skeptical when you're reading anything, rather than just reading it wholesale and accepting it.
Yeah.
Um,
Can you share what some of those biases are? And you don't have to name all 16, but can you share a couple of those?
sure, yeah, bias by omission is one of my favorites.
Okay.
Well, it's one of the most pernicious, so I wouldn't say it's a favorite's the wrong word, but it's just not saying something. So we see this a lot actually in our current context, where the right leaning sources will really focus on a story that the left won't even mention. And then the left leaning sources will focus on what the right won't even mention. And
Right.
so then when people are talking to each other at their dinner table at Thanksgiving, it's like they're in 2 different worlds, and they're like, "What are you even talking about? I've never heard of that."
Right.
And I think there's a lot of people out there who are experiencing that because of this bias by omission of I just won't mention that story.
Mhm.
Yeah.
What are a couple other ones?
So bias by word choice. The way I think about this one is clickbait.
Okay.
So it's choosing words that are perhaps a little more sensational than the
Mhm.
situation calls for.
Yep.
It's worth noting that most of our traditional news media, their business model is driven by clicks, because they're
Right.
getting money from ads, or they're getting money from people signing up. So they have to serve a certain kind of niche, right? um, we're trying to build a new business model, and there's a lot of other folks in news out there looking for a different business model.
Mhm.
But ours is credibility driven. So the only
Right.
reason people give us money or subscribe to AllSides is because they can trust us, and there's credibility to the AllSides brand. And so we are very cognizant of that, and we are very driven by that. And that actually drives our balance. And that's why we think AllSides works.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, sometimes it's easy to forget that media is a business. Back when we were growing up, there was, ABC, CBS, NBC. that was it. And then like Fox showed up, but that was kind of it. And now there's thousands of places to get it. So they're all in competition with each other. And to your point, there's ad revenue and there's, what works and what doesn't. If this works, we're going to keep going in this direction, whether it's really valid or not. So there's a lot of ways that it can get muddy really, really fast.
Yeah, and none of us are above those incentives. We could fool ourselves into thinking like I won't write that, or I won't fall prey to those incentives, but we do. And so we're really trying to structure our business in a way that allows us to have the right incentives.
Yeah, I love that. So you mentioned before we went live that there's something new coming out, and you don't have to share that specifically. And talk to us about what some of the future goals of AllSides are in terms of expanding your reach and your impact. What does that look like 3 years down the road?
Sure. Yeah. So reach, uh, when I first started at AllSides, I felt like it was nobody knew about it. And I tell people all the time, and they're like, this is exactly what I was looking for. This is exactly what we need.
Yeah.
And so we just got to get it out there. So we're working hard on just kind of raising the profile of AllSides. We tripled our audience last year. We want to do that again this year, and we're
Mhm.
on track to do that. So we're definitely focused on awareness, focused on reach. For impact, we're actually a little more focused on people, on newsrooms. So we have clients that we work with to understand bias in their own work. So we'll audit their work and then we'll provide suggestions to their newsrooms and tools that they can use to have more balanced um, news and it kind of adjust some of their standards.
How receptive are they to those suggestions?
Well, the newsrooms that we work with right now, it's coming from the top. So it's the leaders who have really identified that this is the way forward, that they need their audience to trust them.
Mhm.
Um, we have reached out to many others. We've gone to conferences. We've explained, what we do and what we offer, and many have not taken us up on that offer.
Right.
But I would suggest that the people who have a competitive edge. There was a major market in LA. I can't say who it was yet. We will soon. But a couple years ago, we analyzed them, and they were lean left. So a lot of their writing had a left leaning bias.
Mhm.
They worked with us for a couple years, and at the end of last year, analyzed them again, and they actually earned what we call balance certified, um,
What
which
is
is
that?
kind of a stamp for a year that this newsroom has really displayed exemplary balance, and that they're really both in their outcomes and how they're working, showing that they are a balanced news organization.
That's nice. I love that. So the goal would be to have more of those, ideally.
Yeah, and that's the most exciting thing to our team. They get totally jazzed when that happens, because it's real impact. The people who are now, the audience for that newsroom, they're getting more balanced news. They're getting more perspectives, and that's so exciting.
Yeah. You said earlier that a third of your readership comes from the schools, which is incredible. Are there any plans to expand the number of schools that are leveraging All Sides as one of their platforms for the students?
Absolutely. Yes. So there's actually a lot of states passing media literacy standards. There's some states restricting what you can say.
Hmm.
And it's actually restricted teachers' ability to teach current events and to teach news. But a lot of states are refocusing on media literacy, on civics. They're actually, I've been told by, we have a teacher advisory board, and I've been told to say digital literacy, not media literacy, because they have different connotations.
Okay.
But more and more teachers, I mean, we have teachers reach out to us every day to inquire about how to use all sides. We're
Wow.
actually working on some webinars right now to make it a little bit easier to implement. Having worked in schools, I am hyper aware of how little time teachers have. And so I think that's the major barrier right now is they may like all sides, they may like the tools, but
Hmm.
figuring out how to implement that in an already busy scope and sequence and busy schedule is really difficult.
Right. What are some of those digital literacy criteria?
Um, as far as like what standards the students need
Yeah,
to
what's
learn.
some standards?
Yeah. The generally accepted approach right now is to teach students how to ask questions about what they're learning,
Okay,
or
beautiful.
what they're reading. So there's a number of formats out there, but usually it's like, who is the author? Why are they writing this? Who are they writing to? Who is paying for this article?
Hmm.
What is the background of the organization? Who runs the organization? There's this idea of lateral reading where you're
Hmm.
reading an article and you read it, and then you open up another tab and you Google the author, and then you open up another tab and you Google the organization,
Right.
and you learn a little more about the context around the article.
I mean, I love all of that because it gives the students not only for digital literacy slash media literacy, but the skills in which they're leveraging and the questions that are expanding their mind. They can take those skills and plop them into anything else that they're doing. They have that new discerning lens that they're looking at the world through. That's incredible.
And it's really important for any of us when we're getting something from the internet to ask, what is missing from this message? What are they not saying? And just to be curious and skeptical. And I want to mention that the other area that we're digging into is dialogue. So a few years ago, we realized that we're not just kind of siloed on our information flows, but also in our relationship flows and who we talk to. And so we have actually created a new platform called Mismatch. We did a pilot back in 2019 before the pandemic, and we relaunched it last year. And it's for schools, and it matches classrooms from across the country. It's like the worst dating app in the world. It matches classrooms that are from very different backgrounds to have a facilitated conversation with each other.
Oh
And
my God, that's incredible.
yeah, I mean, it's magical what happens with students when they come in with these preconceived notions of, this rural kid or this city kid is so different from me. And then they have a conversation and you see that light go on of, actually, they're not that different from me. And they're different in an interesting way. And it also teaches them just how to have a conversation. Which is a good skill for any student to learn. So it's really focused on high school kids.
Uh-huh.
But anyone can go to mismatch.org to sign up. Like I said, we're really focused on students right now,
Mhm.
but we're hoping to expand that in the future.
So take us into what that facilitated conversation looks like with the students.
Sure. Yeah. So we partner with Living Room Conversations. They've been doing this for 20 years of convening people around a dining room table and facilitating
Mhm.
dialogue with them. And so we've created with them 8 different dialogue guides. In the first round, you just get to know each other. There's questions for the students to answer, and they each have to listen to each other.
Okay.
In the second round, you dive into the topic. So we have one of the topics is called to vote or not to vote. And there's questions that they are prompted to answer about what voting means to them and why they
Wow.
would vote and voting rights. And they have to listen to each other's responses, give
Mhm.
each other space to say what they need to say, and then respond. So it's a lot of practicing listening and practicing listening and then responding, not just thinking about what you're going to say. And
Mhm.
then the last is a wrap up. What did I hear? What was I surprised by? Um, what did I appreciate in what the other person said? And then that's it. It's not super complicated, but it does work.
So where can our listeners learn more about All Sides? Where do we go?
So you can visit allsides.com. Like I said, we have an app that you can download that's free. If you go to allsides.com, you can see the balanced news feed. You can sign up to be a free member. You can sign up for our newsletter. And then we have a number of paid options. very shortly, we will be releasing a premium product where people can analyze any article for bias using what we're calling our bias checker. So that's coming soon, so people can watch out for that.
Nice. Alice, thank you so much. This was extremely informative. For our listeners, we will have links to AllSides and Alice's bio in the show notes, and we'll see you back here next time. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to Women Igniting Change. I know creating change matters to you. If you enjoy what we talk about on the show, please take one action today and share it with someone who could benefit from listening. Until next time, keep standing up and speaking out for what matters.